Hello, I'm Damon McMurdo, and I'm here to continue our study of adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. We are probably going to do 4,286 different examples to make sure that we understand how to do these problems. So please, work along with me, pause the video when I put the problem up, solve it, showing all your steps, and then watch as I go through. You'll unpause it and watch as I go through the problem. Please, for the love of Pete, learn how to do this before your teacher loses his mind again, more crazier. I don't know what he'll be, but he'll be something. Let's look at our first problem. We'll start with adding fractions. We're going to take 8 over 21 plus 3 over 7. We're going to add these two fractions together. Now, right now, we can't add the fractions because they don't have the same denominator. You cannot add fractions without having the same denominator. And my advice to you is when you're adding fractions, write them vertically instead of horizontally, because looking at your papers, when most of you wrote them horizontally and left them that way, you just added straight across, and that's not correct. Okay, so we got to find a common denominator. Our first step is finding the least common denominator. We take both our numerator and our denominator, we take both our denominators, which in this case are 21 and 7, and we're making a mini multiplication chart on how to find the least common multiple, least common denominator, least common multiple, both the same things. So we're going to make this, and we're going to take through each step, each number. We take that denominator, both denominators, multiply by 1. We don't have anything the same. We multiply by 2. And I'm just going to go with my 7 because I know it goes into 21. So I know 21 is my common denominator, but I want you to see the process. So 7 times 2 is 14. That's 42. Multiply by 3. 21 times 3 is 63. 7 times 3 is 21. Once I find the first number that shows up in both fractions, the 21 here and the 21 here, that tells me that's my least common denominator. I have to change both of these fractions so that they have a denominator of 21 without changing the value. So I'm going to take the fractions, and I'm going to write them down. I'm going to write down denominators of 21, and then I'm going to figure out what I do to get my numerator. And what I'm going to do to get my numerator is I have to multiply by a fraction that equals 1. My fraction that equals 1 here is what I multiplied times 21. So 21 times 1 equals 1. So I'm going to multiply by 1 over 1. 8 times 1 is 8. What do I multiply by 7 to get 21? I multiply 7 times 3 gives me 21. So if I multiply my denominator to get 21, I have to multiply my numerator by the same thing so that I am multiplying by a fraction that equals 1. 3 times 3 is 9. I know that this is an addition problem. I bring my sign straight over so I can pay attention to it and make sure that I have the right sign. Now I just go through. My denominator stays the same. My numerator, I just add my numerators. 8 plus 9 is 17. So I have a fraction 17 over 21. Is it a proper fraction? Yes, it's a proper fraction, which means I don't change it to a mixed number. Only if the numerator is greater than denominator do I change it to a mixed number. So this is fine. However, I need to see if I can simplify it. I want to find the greatest common factor of 17 and 21. and I find all the factors of both of these. Now I know 17 is prime because I looked in my journal. It's on the Siva Veritasenes. Since it's prime, it only has two factors, 1 and 17. If we took our graph paper, and we tried to cut our rectangle out that equals 17 squares on the inside, the only way we could do it would be one strip of 17. However, if we took our graph paper and we wanted to find the factors of 21, we could multiply 1 times 21 or 3 times 7. So we could have two rectangles. One rectangle that is 1 square wide, or 1 square wide and 21 long, or 3 squares wide and 7 long. Okay, then I identify what they have in common. They both have a 1 in common. Do they have anything else in common? No, they don't have anything else in common. Since they only have a 1 in common, my greatest common factor is 1. If my greatest common factor is 1, this fraction is already simplified. Okay, let's work a subtraction problem. All right, let me get my eraser. All right, I'm going to erase this, then we're going to work a subtraction problem. After I give you the problem, I want you to write it down. And then I want you to pause the video, do the problem on your own, and then we'll go through it together. After you finish it, you think you've got it right, unpause it, and then I'll go through it here. And you'll be able to see how you did. If you didn't do it right, you'll be able to see why you didn't do it right. You're going to get an opportunity to take that quiz again. So you want to keep that in mind. Let's take 10/11, subtract 16 over 22. 10/11, subtract 16 over 22. Now, initially, it looks like you can't do this. Because you're like, dude, you can't take 16 from 10. It's not going to work. But then you realize that you don't have a common denominator here. Also, think about this. 10 over 11 is less than 1. And I'm taking something from a number that is less than 1. So my answer is not going to be a mixed number. It's not going to be a mixed number because I'm starting with something smaller than 1 and taking something away from it. Okay? So if you get a mixed number, you've done something wrong. But you got to think about what the problem is to see if that makes sense. All right, we need to find the least common multiple of 11 and 22. The least common denominator for 11 and 22. So times 1 times 2, 11 times 2 is 22. There's my least common denominator. What I would always suggest is see if your smallest one goes into your biggest one. See if the smallest one, or if the biggest one is a multiple of your smallest one. That makes it easy. A lot of times it's going to be that way. All right, so let's change both these fractions so that they have a denominator of 22. Okay, what I saw some people doing is just moving the 10 over. 10 out of 11 is not the same as 10 out of 22. So you cannot just move the numerator over. What you need to do is we need to multiply by a fraction that equals 1. But that fraction has to give us a denominator of 22. So we have to figure out 11 times what gives us 22. And in this case, and I can look here, I see that 11 times 2 gives us 22. So I need to multiply by 2 over 2. I'm making my denominator bigger, so I must make my numerator bigger so that it stays equivalent, so that this fraction is equal to that. So 10 out of 11 is the same value as 20 out of 22. Okay? This one, I have to get a denominator of 22. Well, guess what? I already have a denominator of 22. So all I have to really do is move my 16 straight over. All I have to do is move the 16 straight over. Now I want to identify this is a subtraction problem so that I don't accidentally add. My denominator stays the same. My numerator is 20 minus 16, so my numerator is 4. Now once again, I want to make sure that I can't simplify. So I'm going to find the greatest common factor. When simplifying a fraction, we must find the greatest common factor. So I'm going to find the greatest common factor of 4 and 22. Greatest common, the factors of 4. If I had to cut out factor arrays, you did that earlier this year, I could make a factor array that was 1 square by 4 squares or 2 squares by 2 squares. Okay? My factor arrays for 22 would be 1 times 22 and 2 times 11. Those are the only factor squares I could make to get 22. These are the only factor squares I could make to get 4. I identify what they have in common. They have a 1 in common. That's not all they have in common. They have a 2 in common. Since they have a 2 in common and nothing else in common, my greatest common factor is 2. Once I find my greatest common factor, I simplify my fraction by the greatest common factor. So I'm dividing both the numerator and the denominator by my greatest common factor of 2. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. 22 divided by 2 is 11. So my final answer to the problem 10/11 minus 16 over 22, the final answer is 2 over 11. A lot of work to solve the problem, but it's not work that is impossible for you to do. If you take your time, think about it, follow the steps, follow your notes, this is easy. But I really need you to go through it, take your time, and follow the steps. Let's do an addition one. All right, so let's look at 1/4 plus 4/5. Again, I write it vertically. Okay, I write it vertically. It makes it easier to set up the rest of the problem so that I know what I'm doing. I cannot find, or I cannot add these or subtract these because they don't have a common denominator. So I got to find the least common denominator. That's step 1. We find the least common denominator. We're looking for the least common denominator of 4 and 5. And if you have access to a multiplication chart, you can always use a multiplication chart, and you won't have to do all this part. So if I multiply by 1, multiply by 2, 4 times 2 is 8, 5 times 2 is 10. Do I have the same number that appears in both rows yet? I do not. So I multiply by 3. 4 times 3 is 12. 5 times 3 is 15. Do I have the same number that appears in both rows yet? No, I do not. Do I multiply by 4? 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times 5 is 20. Do I have the same number appearing in both rows yet? No, I do not. So I must continue. Multiply by 5. 5 times 4 is 20. And there I have my least common denominator of 20. Okay? Again, not difficult. You made a multiplication table for 4 and 5. Nothing about this is too hard for you to do. Nothing about it is too hard for you to do. It's really very easy. You just got to remember what to do. So now we change so these both have a denominator of 20. We can go back and look here. What did I multiply by 4 to get 20? I multiplied that by 5. So I have to multiply my numerator and my denominator by 5. 1 times 5 is 5. And we already did 4 times 5 is 20. Then I have to multiply here. And what did I multiply by 5 to get 20? If I go here, 5 times 4 is 20. So then I can multiply both of these by 4. And 4 times 4 is 16. I need to make sure I know what sign it is, what operation I'm doing. In this case, I'm adding. When I add fractions, my denominator stays the same, and I add my numerators together. So to get my numerator, it's 5 plus 16, which is 21. I have the fraction 21/20ths. That is what we call an improper fraction. And it's an improper fraction because the numerator is larger than the denominator. We can't leave it that way. We can never leave a fraction as an improper fraction. We're going to change it to a mixed number. To change a fraction, an improper fraction, to a mixed number, you follow these steps. You divide the denominator into the numerator. When you do that, you're going to get a quotient. And you're going to get a remainder. Once you've done the division, all you have to do is replace. My denominator here is 20. My numerator here, and that's what goes on the inside because that's what it says, is 21. Okay? I'm just replacing the letter, or the numbers are going in where the letters match up. Then I do my division. Once I have the problem, 20 goes into 21 one time. 1 times 20 is 20. Subtract, I get 1. Remainder 1. I take my quotient. That's my whole number. I take my remainder, because that's going to be my numerator. And my denominator stays the same. So I get 1 and 1/20. If you want to look at it with the letters, you get your quotient and your remainder and denominator. And that's how it would be. An easy way to remember it is if you take and you put your remainder up there and just write your denominator there, you're going to remember that just 1 and 1/20. All I have to do is rewrite that up there. So 1/4 plus 4/5 equals 1 and 1/20. Easy as pie. You can do this. I'm going to write another one up there. This one will be a subtraction problem. After I write it down, please pause the video, solve the problem, restart the video, and watch how I solve it. Again, I'm showing every step. Hopefully you're going to eventually be really good at this and you're not going to need to see every step. You're going to be able to do some of the steps in your head. But don't do it in your head until you're very, very, very good at it. Because what I'm seeing is too many of you trying to do it in your head and making silly mistakes, like I said right at the beginning of the year. So let's look at a subtraction problem. Let's look at 4/8. Subtract 12 over 24. Subtract 12 over 24. Again, think. 4/8 is less than 1. And I'm subtracting something from that. My answer has to be less than 1. Okay? If I get an answer that's greater than 1 or equal to 1, I've done something wrong. I take my two denominators, which is my total number of pieces, and I find the least common denominator of 8 and 24. 8 times 2 is 16. 24 times 2 is 48. 8 times 3 is 24. There, I have found my least common denominator. It is the first number that shows up in both rows. I change these so that they're both over 24. What I had to multiply here, 8 times what gave me 24? Because I want to make this a fraction that equals 1. 8 times 3 gave me 24. So then I multiply by your numerators. 4 times 3 is 12. Then I multiply across here. This is already 24. So all I have to do is put the 12 over here. I'm subtracting, so identify your sign. And I have 12 over 24, subtract 12 over 24. If you write it as 0 over 24 as your answer, I'm going to mark it wrong. Because if you had 0 out of the 24 marbles in the bag, you wouldn't say I have 0 24ths of the marbles. You'd say, I have none of them. I have 0 marbles. Your answer would be 0. Don't leave a fraction as 0 over something. Then it's just 0. We're not ever going to leave it 0 over something. Then it's just 0. Okay, and since it's just 0, I can't simplify it. All right, we'll do an addition one. We're going to do 4/8 plus 2/4. First thing we have to do is we find the least common denominator of 8 and 4. 8 times 2 is 16. 4 times 2 is 8. We found it very easily. Very easily we found it. We want to change these so they're both over 8. This is already over 8. It's an addition sign. 2/4, I had to multiply by 2 to get 8. So if I had to multiply 4 times 2 to get 8, I have to multiply 2 times 2 to get 4. Now we're adding. 4/8 plus 4/8. Our denominator stays the same. We add 4 plus 4, which is 8. Now if you left this on an assignment or on a test as 8/8, I'm going to mark it wrong. If you ate 8 out of the 8 pieces of pizza, you ate one whole pizza. Your answer is 1. It's not 8/8. Your answer is 1. Anytime our numerator and denominator have the same value, your answer is 1. Remember that. All right, I think we have time for at least one more. Let's do another subtraction. Let's do 2/4 subtract 3/8. Now, it should become fairly obvious, since we just did one with denominators of 4 and 8, that our common denominator is going to be 8. We're going to change that to 8. Then we got to go through, we got to multiply, because we're making the denominator bigger. We're not making the fraction bigger, we're just making the fraction written with greater numbers but the same value. 4 times 2 is 8, 2 times 2 is 4. We multiply this by 1. Okay? And we get 3 times 1 is 3. I'm subtracting. My denominator stays the same. My numerator is 4 minus 3, which is 1. If I have a numerator of 1, I can't simplify it. This is it. It won't simplify anymore. If I have a numerator of 1, then I'm just done. Okay? I think I have time. Let's look at another one. And again, once I write the problem down, I want you to pause the video, solve it on your own, and then start the video again, and you'll see how I did it. So let's take 6/9, subtract 10/27. 6/9, subtract 10/27. Okay, I'm going to start with my smallest one and see if it goes into 27. See if it has 27 as a multiple. So 9, 18, 27. So it does have 27 as a multiple. I'm going to change this so that they're both over 27. This already is over 27, so I just have to move it over here. I'm going to change this by multiplying by 3/3, because 3/3 equals 1. I don't want to change the value. I'm changing how it's written. 6 times 3 is 18. I'm going to subtract. I bring my sign over. And then I'm just going to subtract 18 27ths, subtract 10 27ths. My denominator stays the same. 18 subtract 10 is 8. So we have 8 over 27. I need to see if I can simplify it. So I'm going to find the greatest common factor of 8 and 27. Just like the factor arrays that we built and hung in the hallway. The only rectangles I can build for 8 are 1 and 8, 2 and 4. No other rectangles would multiply together to equal 8. Couldn't do it. 27. Now some of you are going to think 27 is a prime number. It's not. For our divisibility rules, we already know it's 1 and 27. If you use your divisibility rules, the divisibility rule for 3 says if you add the two numbers together, 2 plus 7 equals 9, and 3 goes into 9. So that tells me 3 times 9. I find all of my common factors. They have a 1 in common. Any other factors in common? They don't. That one doesn't have a 2. That one doesn't have a 4. That one doesn't have an 8. So we're done. And if my greatest common factor equals 1, then my fraction is already in lowest terms, and that's my answer. All right, we're going to do one more. Mostly because I'm going to throw fractions and fractions and fractions at you until you get it stuck in your head. Let's see. I'm going to make one up. Let's take 5/8 plus 3/4. Again, you've probably already figured out by now, our least common denominator is going to be 8. We put this as a denominator of 8. We multiply here this by 1 over 1. That's 5/8. We multiply this by 2 over 2. That's 6/8. We're going to add 5/8 plus 6/8 is 11/8. An improper fraction. You already have this written in your journal. Improper fraction. Denominator into the numerator. 8 goes into 11 one time. 1 times 8 is 8. Subtract. We get 3. So 1 remainder 3. Just put that over 8. So that's going to equal 1 3/8. Okay, yeah, we're going to do one more. I've got to go to duty in a minute, but I still have time for one more. Duty! Oh, let's take 4, we already did that one, I think. No, we didn't. 4/5 minus 11/20. Pause the video, solve it, and then look and see what we get. I'm going to use my multiplication chart. I know my multiples of 5 are 5, 10, 15, 20. My multiples of 20 are 20, 40, 60, 80. Well, 20's here, 20's here. That's going to be my least common multiple, my least common denominator. To go from 5 to 20, I had to multiply by 4. I want to keep this fraction as 1. So 4 times 4 is 16. This is already at 20, so I just move my 11 over. I make sure I know that this is a subtraction problem. Then I have 16/20, subtract 11/20. My denominator stays the same. 16 minus 11 is 5. Now we have to simplify this. Or we have to see if it can be simplified. I'm finding the greatest common factor of 5 and 20. My factors of 5 are 1 and 5. My factors of 20 are 1 times 20, 2 times 10, 4 times 5. They have 5 in common. We divide these both by 5, and we get an answer of 1/4. Hopefully you got an answer of 1/4 as well. Thank you so much for watching.